So all of our animals are free-range animals. That means that they're out in the range. They get to eat grass, they get to eat alfalfa, and then our producers bring out what is called a crib feeder. So essentially imagine a trough on wheels.
You know, we have so much evidence to show that cholesterol doesn't actually cause heart disease. That's not the problem here. There's an inflammatory process, and it actually has to do with hyperglycemia and different kinds of cholesterol molecules like VLDL and SDLDL that are derived from fructose and alcohol, not from meat. And that these then get glycated from the high blood sugar, and that your body can't suck these things up anymore because it's just damaged now. That's what glycation is what kills diabetics, having that high blood sugar. And so now your body can't suck these things up. Your liver can't process them. The only things that can pick these up are the scavenger receptors on your macrophages. And so your macrophages start picking these things up. They just eat them up, and they grow and grow and grow. They turn these massive foam cells. And during this whole inflammatory process, you start getting these atherosclerotic plaques. Okay, that's been well described in the literature. Okay, so it's not cholesterol, it's this entire disease process that is pushed and predicated on eating sugar, eating carbohydrates, drinking alcohol, okay? Smoking cigarettes. Oh, there's a ton of things that add to this, but just eating cholesterol is really not the driving factor here.
Cholesterol has many roles in the body, right? And one of them is thought to be in the immune system. And people with low levels of cholesterol, there is an association with cancer and with development of things like infections like pneumonia. So there's an issue there.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being back to Growth Factor. I'm Amalya. And the reason I do my show is there's many ways to grow mentally, spiritually, physically. And one of the things we can do that covers all that is give ourselves nutrients, the best for our bodies. And for me personally, I have to eat a lot of red meats. When I was vegan, I'm a nutritionist, I'm a hypnotherapist, and I raised my kids pretty much vegan. We were having gut issues, mental health issues. And in my view, for some of us, we can have a lot of anxiety not having the proper nutrients. And for me, instead of taking mental health pills, I just eat red meat, and that's my cure. So I'm so glad that Ilan Parenti is here. He's from Glatt Kosher Meats. He's a managing partner. And I just want to thank you for being here and let us know all about your meats, Ilan. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me on the program. Just as an introduction, Glatt Kosher Meats is a Glatt Kosher meat company. Our products can be found throughout the United States at every local Trader Joe's, select Costco stores in Jewish neighborhoods in particular, and other fine retailers throughout the United States. What makes, let's start with the name Teva. Teva itself in Hebrew means nature. And we thought that would be an appropriate name essentially because we do bring a natural product to the consumer. What we mean by natural, if you notice on meat packages, it's kind of sneaky. Many companies basically say natural meat, and then there's an asterisk next to it. And that's because of the USDA. The United States Department of Agriculture basically dictates what the word natural means. And if you follow that asterisk to the bottom of the package, it basically says minimally processed. What does that mean, minimally processed? By definition, USDA definition, it means that the meat itself is taken off the bone by the use of a knife. And obviously, that's how meat is cut. I like to tell people that we slaughter cattle, in our case, and prepare the meat almost like the cavemen used to, except we have fancier tools. The animal basically still gets slaughtered and gets taken apart by the use of a knife. We do have additional processes because we are a Glatt Kosher processor that we adhere to, but essentially nothing much has changed since really the caveman time. As far as going back to the name Teva itself and natural, what we mean by natural, our definition of natural is no antibiotics and no hormones in our meat. Now, how do animals consume antibiotics? How do they get antibiotics? Two methods, one more prevalent than the other. One is shots, which gets expensive, and the other one is through feed. So antibiotics are basically put into the animal's feed, the animal consumes it, and we now have a meat full of antibiotics, which would prevent, obviously, disease from that animal. Basically keeps the veterinarian away. We don't believe in that. We believe basically that animals should forage naturally, and animals that don't make the cut, in other words, do get sick, and animals do get sick, very much like us, those animals then are pulled out of our pool, and we don't get to slaughter that animal. That animal goes to someone else for processing, slaughter, etc. In addition to that, probably over 95% of animals are implanted with hormones. And the simple reason is we've commercialized essentially the growth of animals. And the way you do that is you implant hormones in the animal ear. That hormone is basically discharged on a regular basis. It keeps the animal hungry. And thus we can typically grow an animal within 24, 26 months, which is the age we harvest our animals at. And we now have a fatter animal, an animal that has eaten well and would grade well. Okay, so if I don't mean to throw the word grade out just like that. If you walk into your typical supermarket, Costco, etc., you'll notice that there's a shield on the wall, your local Walmart, and it says we sell choice USDA meats or prime meats, etc. Okay, so the animals actually, the carcass itself gets graded, okay, by an inspector as to the quality of the meat itself. Okay, marbling grade, size of the animal, many different criteria that basically come into play here. Let's talk about how we harvest our animals. The animals are shechted. Shechita basically is a reference to ritual slaughter. We have a group of shochtim or slaughtermen who we bring from Israel to wherever we decide to slaughter. If it's in Uruguay or Argentina, we slaughter strictly Angus genetic cattle, and we'll discuss genetics in animals and what that means from a quality standpoint. These rabbis come out, hardworking folks. They typically get to leave their family for 5-6 weeks at a time, go to a foreign land, and we start our day early. We start our day around 2:30 in the morning, and the simple reason for that is we try and avoid the animals standing around during midday when the sun is out. We just don't want those animals to suffer the heat. So we start our day early. By 10 a.m., we're typically done with our task for that day, and we retire back to our living quarters where we sit, study, eat, daven, pray, and get ready for the following day. The shechita process itself or slaughter process itself is beautiful to see. I know it sounds crazy. Most people relate to, my gosh, you take a knife and you cut an animal's throat and blood comes gushing out, and the visual basically is not beautiful. However, when it's done professionally and when it's done properly, that animal is typically out within 17 seconds and has felt nothing. That knife has to be of a certain size, a certain width, etc. There are rules as to how that animal gets slaughtered. There should be no hesitation in the slaughter process itself. After each animal is slaughtered, the chalofen, which is what the knife is called, is checked for any type of imperfections. And the only thing I can explain to people, what does that mean, imperfections on a knife? Have you ever licked an envelope and cut yourself? You get a paper cut. And you really don't feel that cut till after something enters that cut. If it's sweat or anything else, that's when you actually feel the pain that you've cut yourself. And then you look at the blood. In the case of that animal, we essentially have cut the trachea and the esophagus. In addition to that cut, there are veins essentially that are also cut in the process. And that animal essentially has been desensitized. And we hoist that animal at that point and start what we call the dress process, the removal of the hide, the internal organs, etc. That animal then goes down the line. After it's split, the carcass is split. So now you have two sides of beef. Those two sides of beef get graded, weighed, etc., and then goes into a cooler. Now, between the shechita and that cooler, we do a lot of work. Okay, that's what basically kosher means. So, what qualifies an animal as a kosher animal versus an animal that doesn't go kosher? And mind you, just as a simple mathematics, let's take a round number of 100. If we slaughter 100 animals, out of those 100 animals, typically only 50% of those animals qualify for kosher. What happens to the other 50%? They get simply sold into the non-kosher market. Now, of that 50%, 50 animals that have gone kosher, what do we look for in that animal? First of all, an animal has to be able to come into the kill box on its own. It cannot be limping. It cannot have any type of bruises, etc., which would disqualify it from kosher slaughter. That animal then is shechted or slaughtered. It goes down the line, and at a point where it's eviscerated, where the guts are pulled out of the animal, we have a bodek, an individual, another rabbi, whose job is to basically do a blind inspection. We call him the bodek pnim. Bodek means checker. Pnim means internal. So imagine essentially you basically put your arm into a dark cavity and you're looking essentially for any adhesions between the lung and the chest cavity. What's the importance of that? We also have a bodek chutz. So the guy who's doing the blind inspection, first of all, is looking for adhesions which may be left after that lung is pulled out, may be left on the inside, which means we missed it. So his job is to basically mark the lung itself. Okay, he has a card, he marks where he might have felt something, and he puts that on the carcass. The carcass then goes into a next position where the lung-heart combination is removed, and that's handed to a second rabbi whose job is to check the lung when it's out of the animal. He then looks at the card that he's handed and he says, the other rabbi told me to check the lobe. I'm going to go to the lobe and take a look and see what he felt. Have you ever had a flat bicycle tire? You pull that tube out, and how do you check where that hole is? If it's not visually there, you basically inflate that tube and you stick it essentially in water and you look for the bubbles. You look for the escaping air. It's exactly what we do. The bodek chutz essentially